All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're reading Yetta, page 80 to 90. Yetta held the sign high over her head. Triangle workers on strike, it said, in Yiddish and English. She'd lettered the sign herself, carefully copying the English from a sheet of paper another girl gave her. She'd dressed with extra care that morning, even borrowing Rahel's fancy hat. You'll be the public face of the strike, Rahel had said, placing the hat at precisely the right angle to ride the swell of Yetta's thick hair. I'm just going to be in the union office. That's important too, Yetta said loyally. But secretly she was glad that she wasn't quite as good at English as Rahel, wasn't quite old enough to be trusted with coordinating picketers and registration and funds for strikers who were already beginning to worry where their next meal would come from. They'd been on strike for exactly 1 week now, and Yetta had signed up for all the picketing time she could. Now, in the light of an early October dawn, she paced outside the Triangle factory doors with a dozen other girls who held their signs equally high, kept their backs equally straight. She remembered all the men back in her shtetl who prayed each day, "Thank you, God, for not making me a woman." They're wrong, she thought. If she was still Jewish, she would be thanking God because he'd made her female. The strike leaders had decided that it was best to have the girls picket because they would attract the most sympathy. And Yetta had seen how the bypassers looked at her and the other strikers. She'd heard them murmuring, "Those poor things," and, "But they're so pretty." She saw a group of young men stop on the sidewalk, watching. Yetta lowered her gaze demurely, but she made sure that her sign was turned so they could read it. One of the young men detached himself from the group and strolled over to her. "What's your gripe?" he asked, in English. "Gripe?" Yetta repeated uncertainly. This young man had chestnut hair and brilliant blue eyes, and it was so clear that he was rich, with that good wool coat and those perfectly shined shoes. If she weren't so blinded by the whiteness of his teeth, maybe she could remember her English a little better. "Yeah," the man said, gesturing up at her sign. "Why are you on strike? Do you have some reason, or do you just not feel like working today?" "We want," Yetta struggled to pronounce the English words correctly. "We want union recognition. We have that right. We were forming a union. We had 150 workers go to a secret meeting, but there were spies there, and our bosses said we couldn't have our own union. We could only join this fake union the bosses made up, the Triangle Employee Benevolent Association. Oh, the officers of that union were related to the bosses. I ask you, what kind of union is that? And then they locked us out, everyone who was trying to make a real union. They said there was no more work, but the next day they advertised for more workers in the papers. They say they just got a big order, unexpectedly. But if that were true, why wouldn't they just hire us back?" The young man shrugged. "So, what good's a union?" he asked. "Sounds to me like it just lost you your job." That's not how it's supposed to work," Yetta said indignantly. "If everyone unites all the workers together, a union can protect everyone. If there's a union, the whole shop all together, then the bosses cannot cheat you anymore. It's not just one girl standing alone saying, 'Why did you only pay me $3 this week? Why did you lie to me? Why did you cheat me?' It's everyone saying, 'This isn't fair. You can't do this to me.'" The young man stroked his mustache thoughtfully. "You make $3 a week?" "No, but some girls—" "Aha," the man said. "Who's lying now?" "I have worked my way up," Yetta said, trying to keep proper dignity. "But even so, some weeks the bosses only pay—" "You probably have a boyfriend anyhow, to give you your finery," the man interrupted, actually reaching out to touch the feather on Yetta's hat. "And I'm sure your parents are still supporting you, so it's just funny money you're earning, just for the little luxuries every girl craves." "No, my parents, they—" "Come on, Harry," one of the other men called from the corner in a bored voice. "Quit flirting. We're going to be late for class." Nice talking to you, Harry said, turning to go. My parents are not supporting me. I am supporting them, yelled after him. But she was so upset that she accidentally yelled it in Yiddish. I couldn't understand a word she said, she heard Harry tell the rest of his friends when he rejoined them. But those are the prettiest strikers I've ever seen. Yetta was furious. He had understood her. She was sure of it. Anna, the girl picketing behind her, leaned forward. Those were law students, she said in an awestruck voice. Law students, actually paying attention to us, to our strike. What? Anna pointed. There's a law school right behind the factory building. New York University School of Law. Haven't you seen the sign? Yetta hadn't. Before the strike, she'd barely seen any of the city by daylight. Law students. Some of Yetta's anger drained away into pride. She'd just explained the strike to a law student. Maybe he hadn't really listened closely enough. Maybe she'd have to work on her arguments for the next time. But still, law students. Watch out, Anna called out. The scabs are coming. Yetta tightened her grip on her sign. Policemen barreled through the strikers. Make way, you're blocking the sidewalks. Remember, stay calm, just tell them the truth. Please, Yetta called out to the scabs. Please don't cross our picket line. We're striking for you too, so we all have rights as workers. Don't go into work today. Go sign up at the union office. Join us. She was careful to speak in her best English because most of the scabs were Americans or Italians. She was glad to hear one Italian striker, Rosario, calling out in her language too, the words strangely musical. The scabs pretended not to hear. They mostly cowered, keeping their eyes on the ground. They were so rabbity, Yetta could almost feel sorry for them. Then Yetta noticed a different group of women behind the police and scabs. These women wore stoles of fur and feathers. Their dresses were tawdry colors, reds and orange and yellows. The dresses were also oddly shaped, slit up the sides with plunging necklines in the front and back. And the women's faces were heavily painted, every pockmark and blemish coated, every cheek and lip unnaturally reddened. Yetta had never seen anyone like this before. She only heard stories. Are they prostitutes? Yetta wondered. What are prostitutes doing here? Leave the workers alone, one of the women screamed, slamming her fist directly into Yetta's jaw. Yetta's brain was still trying to make sense of what she was seeing. She was working on a theory that maybe these women were apparitions, hallucinations brought on by her having skipped breakfast. So it took even longer to accept that this woman was actually touching her, punching more precisely, punching and kicking and yanking at her hair. Yetta fell to the ground, her sign cracking on the pavement. Stop, she cried, trying to push the woman off her. But the woman pulled out Yetta's own hat pin from Rahel's beautiful hat and stabbed it into Yetta's arm. Yetta squirmed away and struggled to stand up, but another woman shoved her down again. Help! Yetta screamed, but all the other strikers were suffering punches and kicks and pinches too. Yetta had seen plenty of little boys fighting in the street, even men throwing punches. But she'd never been in a fight like this herself, never known how much it would hurt. Her eyes stung, and she wasn't sure if it was from tears or blood. She kept trying to push the woman away, but they were right back at her, right away, punch after punch after punch. That's enough. It was a policeman pulling the woman off Yetta. I should say so, Yetta said indignantly. Thank you for finally. But the policeman was clamping handcuffs onto Yetta's wrists, growling into her bloody face, You're under arrest. With his beefy hand wrapped tightly around Yetta's arm, holding her still, he turned toward the prostitutes. You're free to go, he told them. The prostitutes straightened their dresses, patted their hair back into place. One of them blew a kiss to the policeman. Wait a minute. That's not fair, Yetta complained. They attacked me. I didn't do anything to them. Look, which of us is bleeding? The policeman jerked on the handcuffs, making them rub against Yetta's sore wrists. "You're a striker, aren't you?" he asked. "Yes, but—" The policeman looked back and forth between Yetta and the prostitutes. "Then I can't see much difference." Yetta pushed a blood-soaked strand of hair out of her eyes. She bent down and retrieved Rahel's formerly fine hat, now mashed beyond recognition. The ostrich feather was nowhere to be seen. "We have a right to strike," she protested. "I haven't committed a single illegal act. Tell me, what am I under arrest for?" The policeman yanked her toward the police wagon. "Disorderly conduct. Now shut up, or you'll be charged with being rude to a police officer, too," he said. He lifted the club he'd used to break up the fight. "And I'll beat you myself." "So you're admitting those women beat me," Yetta wanted to say. But she clamped her lips together. That hurt, too, because they were bloody and already beginning to swell. Yetta's fellow strikers stood in sad little clumps by the police wagon. Anna's skirt was in shreds. Rosaria's right eye was swollen shut. Policemen were shoving the girls into the wagon without regard to their injuries. Yetta fought against the policeman holding her arm. She struggled to turn back toward the prostitutes. "Why?" she yelled at the heavily painted woman. "Why do you care about our strike?" One woman began to laugh, revealing the toothless mouth behind her two red lips. "Money, of course," she cackled. "Don't you know anything? In America, money is God." The policeman slammed his club against Yetta's head, and everything went dark. Iron bars. That was the first thing Yetta saw when she opened her eyes. Someone was dabbing at the wound on the side of her head with a cloth. Someone was whispering, "Yetta, oh please, Yetta, wake up." But there were iron bars in front of her, and a filthy stone floor and dark shapes moving across the floor. Were those rats? Yetta struggled to sit up. The iron bars wavered. She was about to black out again. "Shh, shh," a soft voice said. "Take it easy. Just rest." Yetta put her head back down, and her view steadied again. She was lying on a bare wood plank, but one of the other girls had stuffed her jacket under Yetta's head. Anna and Rosaria and a few of the others were crouched around her. Gradually, Yetta found that she could focus on their faces. "Getting blood on your coat," Yetta murmured. "That doesn't matter. It's ripped to ruins anyway. And we're in jail, so what good is a stupid coat?" Anna gave a laugh that turned midway into a near sob. Yetta forced herself to sit up. She forced her eyes to keep a steady gaze on the other girls, not the iron bars. "We'll be all right," she said. "We didn't do anything wrong. They can't keep us here." "They kept my father in prison in Russia," another girl, Surka, said. "They didn't even tell him what he was charged with until he'd been there 3 years. "That was Russia," Yetta said. "This is America." At the other end of the jail cell, a ragged old woman began to laugh crazily, the sound pouring out of her mouth like a taunt or torture. "She's been doing that since we got here," Anna whispered. Yetta was noticing other women in the cell now. Scary women with gaunt, blank faces, sores where their mouths should be, ragged clothes that looked to be mostly held together with dirt. Or maybe they weren't actually wearing any clothes, just the filth. And then she heard footsteps coming down the hallway outside the jail cell. "Strikers!" a man's voice boomed out, echoing off the stone. "Your fines are paid." His key scraped in the lock. Yetta found she could scramble up with the others, though the wound on the side of her head throbbed and her whole body ached. Rahel was waiting beside the jailer on the other side of the iron door. "Oh, Yetta!" she cried, wrapping her arms around her sister. "I was so scared for you." "Tell your sister to stay off picket lines, then," the jailer growled. Yetta wanted to fling back a retort. Maybe, "Tell the bosses to treat us fairly and I will." Maybe, "Tell your policeman to arrest the right people next time." But she could only bury her face in her sister's shoulder. Let her sister guide her away from those iron bars and the rats and the crazy laughing woman and the women dressed in filth. How could you pay the fine?" Yetta murmured when they were back out on the street. "Union money," Rahel said. And they gave me nickels for car fare, too, so we won't have to walk home. The trolley stops right up there on the corner. Can you make it that far?" Around her, the other girls nodded wearily. Yetta was working something out in her head. "The union doesn't have much money," she said. "If we spend it on car fare, we won't have any left for keeping the strike going. My legs aren't bad, just my head. I'll walk." "But," Rahel started. "I'm walking too," Anna said. "Me too," Rosario said. "And me," Circa said. In the end, they all did. One bedraggled, bloodied crew. Everyone on the sidewalk stared and whispered. Yetta wished they still had their picket signs. "We're triangle workers," she explained to some of the people who stared the most. "We're on strike. This is what happened." The strike meant something different now. It wasn't just standing out in the sunshine, carrying a sign, wearing a fine hat, looking pretty. It was more like a war. Rahel kept her arm around Yetta's waist, holding her up, holding her steady. "You still want to strike?" she whispered. "Even now?" Yetta answered through split, bloodied lips. "More than ever." Rahel's face seemed especially pale, out here in the sunlight. She grimaced, then glanced over her shoulder to make sure no one else was listening. "Yetta, those women who beat you up, they were ladies of the evening. Women who sell their bodies. If Papa knew." "Papa isn't here, is he?" Yetta said angrily. "Papa doesn't sit over a sewing machine 10, 12 hours a day. Papa doesn't have a contractor breathing down his neck. He doesn't have a man looking in his hair, patting down his clothes every day to make sure he hasn't stolen any shirtwaist. Papa doesn't have bosses who hire prostitutes to beat him up." Rahel slumped, and for a moment it seemed that it was Yetta holding Rahel up, not the other way around. "You figured it out then," Rahel said sadly. "That's what we thought down at Union headquarters, too. The bosses hired those women. They bribed the police to arrest you." Yetta nodded, not surprised. "What I don't understand," Rahel said, "is why those women? Why not just have the police beat you up and keep it simple?" She attempted a wry smile, but it failed miserably. "Because they're women," Yetta said. She remembered the police looking from her to the prostitute, saying, "You're a striker, aren't you? Then I can't tell the difference. Then I can't see much difference. They want to say we're just as low as those women, just as unclean." It was all of a piece, somehow, with the men back in her shtetl praying, "Thank you, God, for not making me a woman." Men thought women were worthless, stupid, easily cowed. Yetta narrowed her eyes, thinking thoughts she never would have dreamed of back in the shtetl. They weren't even thoughts that fit with the old socialist fervor, but they were what she believed now. God made me, too, she thought, and he made me to fight.